everyone, it's Professor Kettler. I'm going to give you an overview of this activity that you are completing for Module 4. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to kind of look at the rubric for this. So when you open this, it kind of gives you like a prompt that you can review. And then you have critical elements that you have to address. So you're going to explain how your use of a resource impacts your environmental issue that you've chosen. You're going to also discuss whether your use of the resource is typical of U.S. consumption rates and also compare it to global rates. And then you're going to list possible alternatives to lessen your resource use. And then you're going to kind of discuss like how you are going to implement these changes to lessen your personal impact. So if you look at the rubric, it kind of just lists those things there. Now, the thing that really confuses a lot of students is what resources are you talking about? So let's go ahead and look at that. Let me start the slideshow. There we go. All right, and get my little annotator ready. All right, so this is a disclaimer. I've just given a general example, okay? You're going to want to provide a much more in-depth answers than I am providing here. This is just to help you kind of get started, okay? So when we look at this activity, the main overview of this is you're thinking about how are you actually contributing to your environmental issue that you're talking about. So how are you contributing to climate change? How are you contributing to water pollution, air pollution, biodiversity loss, deforestation, things like that? And you might have to get a little creative with this because, if your topic is deforestation, you may not be going out and chopping down trees. However, you might be supporting organizations that do. And then you're going to be looking at calculating your use or consumption of that resource and trying to find ways to reduce it. So you can gather data with two options. One, you can monitor and record your use for a few days and then kind of extrapolate that data. So you might calculate your water usage for 4 days. And then you might find you use a total of 300 gallons a day, and then you multiply that by how many days there are in a year and get the amount of water you use per year. You definitely need to extrapolate it out for a year, not do like just a week or a month, do a year. The other option is you can get existing data by looking at a utility bill, so like an electric bill, a water bill, a trash bill, and that will kind of show your usage for each month. And then you can calculate your annual consumption. The general requirements of this document is that it needs to be 2 to 3 pages. You have to have a properly labeled table, figure, or graph to kind of represent your data, and then use and properly cite at least 3 sources in APA format. So let's talk about the topics versus the contributions, because this is where students tend to struggle. Like a lot of students will come to me and say, I'm not putting invasive species in my yard, but that's what my topic's about. I'm not cutting down trees, but my topic is about deforestation in the rainforest. So let's kind of look at this. This is by no means an exhaustive list. So if you, after listening to this and looking at this, if you're still kind of confused, just email me and we can work on it together. So let's say you chose climate change, okay? Not, like what it causes, just climate change in general. Climate change is caused by emissions, okay? And that's gonna be emissions from driving a car, emissions from electricity, emissions from animals. Like if you're consuming meat, there's a lot of emissions, and you would want to calculate, how much do you drive a year? How much electricity are you using each year? How much meat are you consuming each year? And so that's kind of your contribution. Now, if water pollution was your topic, then you might want to look at, how could you potentially be contributing to water pollution? Do you produce a lot of trash? Do you not dispose of it properly? Are you using a lot of fertilizer for your plants? Do you not always clean up after your pet, or do you just let it sit there, in your yard for a little while? Because anytime it rains, anything that is on the land washes away, it runs off. Do you do oil changes and not, maybe you do it in the driveway and it spills a little bit. So those are ways that you could be contributing to water pollution. Same thing as water usage can contribute to water pollution, because if you're using too much water, then it can concentrate whatever pollutants are in the water because there's not enough water to dilute it. As far as air pollution, if that's your topic, you can look at any kind of emissions that you are producing from driving. So that driving contributes to ozone, it contributes to particulate matter, it contributes to carbon emissions. Same thing with electricity. Any electronics you're using contributes to air pollution, as well as any burning you might do. Setting, if you have like a burn pile in your backyard or things like that. As far as biodiversity, the way that you may contribute to a loss of biodiversity of whatever species you are highlighting, any kind of water usage. So you could track your water usage, because any water you are currently using or overusing is taking away water from that plant or that species of animal. Any kind of trash that's produced, any kind of waste, plastic, paper, or whatever, because most of the time that trash ends up in a landfill or unfortunately littered, and that decreases the biodiversity of the area because it now can no longer support that ecosystem properly. If you chose invasive species, you would want to look at and see, how many invasive species are actually in your yard. Are you planting native species to counteract this? Your contribution could be, I'm not helping this situation because I haven't planted any native species. I haven't done anything to help. So that could be, how you're impacting that. Deforestation, how many homes in your community are made out of wood? How many objects do you have that are made out of wood? A lot of candy and certain hair products and a lot of products in the grocery store actually use palm oil, and palm oil trees in the rainforest people will actually go in, cut down all the native trees in the rainforest to plant palm oil trees, so that way they can produce this crop, and that contributes to deforestation. So you're indirectly contributing to it because you are consuming these products that help foster deforestation. The other thing you could look at is, are you planting any trees each year to kind of offset this deforestation? And then finally, if your topic is waste or sewage, you want to look at how much trash you produce each year, how much water are you using each year, because that can also contribute to sewage amounts and things like that. So like I said, this is not an exhaustive list, but it should hopefully get you started to thinking about, okay, there's ways that I can directly contribute to this issue, and there's ways that I indirectly contribute to this issue by either not doing something or supporting companies and places that are harming the environment based on your topic. Now, this is kind of, like I said, a general overview of what you would put in your paper. So you would explain how your consumption of this resource impacts your chosen environmental issue. So I just talked about, how I'm contributing to oil spills, since that's my topic, because I'm driving a car and I'm consuming fossil fuels for electricity. I talk about, how many miles I drive each week, and how much electricity I use each month. Okay. And that talking about how that all of those things require the need for oil to be used, and therefore, oil and gas companies are going to have to drill for this resource, and that indirectly causes oil spills. So while I am not directly spilling oil, it doesn't matter. I'm still indirectly contributing to the problem. Okay, so you don't have to be so rigid and say, well, I'm not polluting the water. I'm not directly dumping anything into the water. That's great. But there are ways that you are indirectly contributing, and you have to find those ways. All right. Next up, it asks you to find your consumption rates and compare it to the US consumption rates, and the global consumption rates. Now, this is going to require a lot of researching on your part. So you're going to have to probably look up on the internet or in government resources or education resources, how much is being consumed by the U.S. of your your environmental resource, and then compare it to the global consumption. So because I was looking at oil spills, I looked at how much gas I was consuming and how much electricity I was consuming, and then compared it to the U.S. consumption rate and the global consumption rate. Now, I just made up these numbers. Please don't use these numbers as your reference, because that's not going to be accurate. I'm just showing you what this is supposed to look like. And so then I after I put that in there, I talked about, okay, when I look at this, I'm using twice as much gas in driving and electricity when compared to an average American. So I'm going to talk about, is my usage average, above average, or below average? And then I list my references, because you are most definitely going to need references to find these numbers. So make sure that you include those in this section. All right, then the third part is suggest at least 3 alternatives to lessen your personal impact of consuming this resource. So I said, okay, in order to lessen, my consumption of fossil fuels, which, leads to oil and oil spills, I'm going to invest in an electric car. I'm going to try to use renewable energy to power my home. And I'm going to also participate in local government meetings to champion for renewable energy. So it doesn't always have to be a financial investment that you are doing. It could be something as simple as, turning off the lights. Or, I'm going to join a local group to kind of help promote education of this topic, or, be actively involved. And then I used references here because these references are proving that these are viable alternatives to lessening my consumption of that resource. So if, let's say you chose water pollution, right? So 3 ways you could lessen your personal impact is, maybe rationing the water that you use each day. Making sure, your appliances are efficient, or energy efficient appliances, and they're not overusing water. Making sure that you don't have any leaks anywhere. So, you'll just have to look at what is mainly suggested whenever you do your research for lessening your use of that resource. So if you're, doing deforestation, maybe you don't consume those products that have palm oil in them. All right, and then the last part is discuss realistic changes that you could personally make in order to lessen your impact. So you're basically just expanding on the 3 alternatives that you listed. So I talk about, I can work on replacing my fossil fuel vehicle with electric car, and I talk about, how I can do that and why that's important. I can also invest in renewable resources to help heat and cool my home, to provide electricity as well, and that there's tax incentives for it. And then I also address the money issue of it, because I say, okay, while I'm waiting on my savings to catch up, because these things aren't always cheap. So here's some things I'm talking about that I can do in the meantime while I'm saving for those things. So I say, I can carpool to work and have my children ride the bus to school. I can also maintain my thermostat to the recommended levels and turn off appliances when not in use to save on electricity. I also want to become more involved in local efforts to bring renewable energy into my community. I will attend more city council meetings to champion for these energy selections, and also join a local environmental group to help promote education and awareness to the community about renewable energy options. So it's not always direct, like what can you directly do to no longer be, causing harm? Like, especially for those of you that may not, you might find yourself in the awkward position of like, well, I don't really contribute to this. I have a lot of indirect contributions. You could talk about how you can advocate for the solutions that you're talking about. That can be one of your alternatives to lessening your impact, because you are spreading the word of, hey, this is why we need to promote biodiversity, or to get rid of invasive species, or to lessen our water pollution impacts or air pollution, whatever your topic may be. Now, the other thing that I want to share with you, and will also be shared in the class announcements, is the instructor guide. So the instructor guide looks like this. And this is the one that's more in depth that you should kind of use to be your thorough example of what this activity should look like. So, right, like in this paper, they've kind of provided, you know, the miles they drove per week. Then they've looked at, you know, they've provided a graph for their electricity use over a 12-month period. They probably got it from their electricity bill. Then, right, here's the responses that they are providing to each question. And you can see this is very in-depth, right? You know, looking at number 2, they're talking about, you know, their where they conducted their research about, you know, how much electricity is consumed for the average American. And then they kind of use this graph to show the electricity consumption each year for each country. So they're comparing it to that. Then they're talking about changes they can make. And then in last paragraph, they're, you know, they're discussing like how they can make these things happen. And then they have their reference list at the bottom. So this, like I said, this is an overview of how to do this. If you have any questions, please let me know. More than happy to help you, especially if you really struggle with, you know, how am I contributing to this topic? I can definitely work with you on that. All right. I look forward to seeing everybody's work.